The trouble began, as it so often does in such places, on a Monday morning of incongruous serenity. The sun filtered modestly through lace curtains onto a polished breakfast table at Loring House, Suffolk, a symmetrical Georgian pile set stubbornly back from the village green as though it resented intrusion, even by sunlight. The toast was cold, the post delayed, and the housekeeper in mourning for her cat. These were, by general consensus, the worst omens possible. Lord Peter Wimsey, however, seemed untroubled by celestial or feline matters. He stood near the window, immaculately turned out in a dove-grey suit, scrutinizing an oil lamp with the casual absorption of a man wondering whether combustion ought to be considered an art or a convenience. "Curious," he murmured. His companion, Inspector Thorne of the County Constabulary, stifled a sigh. "The lamp, my lord?" Wimsey tilted his head. "Not the lamp itself, dear Thorne, though it is of rather fine construction, wouldn't you say? French, circa 1880. The patina's quite genuine, which is rare in these hysterical times. No, what I find curious is that it was still burning." "In the study?" "Indeed." Wimsey stepped lightly away from the window, glancing about the hallway as though the walls might suddenly confess something unsavory. "At 8 o'clock this morning, when your man Fletcher summoned me from the breakfast room, very bad kidneys, by the way, that tea, he was in some excitement over the business of the locked door and the unresponsive occupant. A fair reaction, given the circumstances, but he made no mention of the lamp." "Because it seemed a triviality," Thorne said firmly. "The real matter is the body of Sir Julian Fremantle slumped at his desk, with a fire poker beside him and the door bolted from within." "A dull weapon for such a distinguished end," said Wimsey with a shrug that bordered on the musical. "Sir Julian was not beloved, I gather." Thorne's moustache bristled. The old boy had his enemies, legal, familial, and ecclesiastical. But suicide's the most sensible explanation, given the state of the room. There was only one key, and no one could have got out. Wimsey wandered back toward the study. "Sensible explanations are rather like tepid tea, Thorne. Comforting, dull, and rarely accurate." The room in question was severe, but genteel, with oak-panelled walls and a thick Aubusson rug muffling sound with almost ecclesiastical grace. Sir Julian's corpse, an arresting thing in its final posture, was leaned forward over a sheaf of legal documents as though drafting his own deposition. His face, still faintly marked by the rigor of life, was twisted more in annoyance than agony. The poker lay not far from his slippered feet, delicately smudged. Wimsey leaned down, hands in pockets, and peered at the hearth. No sign of ash on the poker. The lamp, however, was burning when Fletcher unlocked the door, and it is not of the self-extinguishing sort. "Perhaps he was working late," Thorne offered. "Then why the slippers and smoking jacket? A man rarely chooses flannel to face the infernal bureaucracy of his own estate." Wimsey straightened. "Besides, the ink in his pen is quite dry, at least an hour or more, and yet the lamp was still burning." Thorne frowned. "What's your point?" "No point," said Wimsey cheerfully. "Only an observation. Much like noting that the fire hadn't been lit in the grate, despite this morning's distinct chill, and that there's a faint trace of some chemical smell, perhaps linseed or turpentine, somewhere near the skirting board. My nose isn't what it was, alas." He turned, catching sight of a dark stain just beneath the desk, like a timid shadow unwilling to be noticed. He did not mention it, yet. The butler, a gaunt man with an unfortunate resemblance to a heron in half-mourning, hovered nervously at the threshold. "If your lordship pleases," he murmured. "Mrs. Fremantle is asking if you require anything. Tea, perhaps, or a brandy." Wimsey glanced up with sudden brightness. "Both, if you would. But separately, thank you. Let's not force an alliance too early in the day." Thorne sighed audibly. "We've cordoned off the study and begun interviews with the staff. There's also a niece, I believe, Miss Olivia Harrow, who lives here." Rather overwrought. "Excellent," said Whimsy, already drifting toward the hallway. "Let us apply our minds to the domestic sphere, Thorn. In my experience, the servants rarely know everything, but they always know something. And who knows? Perhaps someone noticed the lamp being lit." He paused at the door, turning back toward the corpse with something oddly akin to pity, or was it curiosity? "A locked room," he said softly. "A lamp still burning, a poker unused, and the faint smell of linseed." He smiled faintly. "How perfectly inconvenient." "Mrs. Fremantle is in the morning room," Thorn said as they left the study and moved through the dim, wainscoted corridors of Loring House. "But I warn you, she's not the most reliable of witnesses. Very delicate." "Delicate," said Lord Peter, arching an eyebrow. "In what sense? Breakable porcelain, emotional vapors, or simply fond of embroidery and elaborate melodrama? Neurasthenic, I suppose you'd call it. But clever. I imagine she knows more than she lets on." "Excellent. I do so enjoy women who pretend to be stupider than they are. It's almost as revealing as the opposite, though not half as amusing." Whimsy adjusted his gloves and followed Thorn into the morning room, where a spill of filtered sunlight illuminated a tableau that might have come from a pre-Raphaelite painting, had the mood not been so dismal. Mrs. Fremantle was seated in a high-backed chair near the hearth, dressed in a dark blue gown of expensive but fussy make. Her hands, narrow and bloodless, were clasped tightly in her lap. A small dog, shivering with either cold or hysteria, occupied the ottoman beside her, blinking resentfully at the intrusion. "My lord," she said, in a voice as thin and brittle as a dried petal, "they tell me you are from Scotland Yard." "Not quite," said Whimsy with a modest inclination of the head. "Merely an interested party with a taste for awkward deaths. I have in the past been accused of interfering with murder investigations, though I much prefer the term contributing." "Julian didn't believe in consulting outsiders," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. "He thought everything could be resolved with good breeding and firm principles." "And a poker?" Whimsy asked gently. The dog yapped once, as though in protest. Mrs. Fremantle's lips tightened. "Julian was not a well man. He had been suffering from terrible neuralgia these past few weeks. It affected his moods, you understand. He could be irritable." "Neuralgia rarely results in blunt force trauma, ma'am," Thorn put in. "It's not so much the trauma," said Whimsy, pacing slowly about the room, "as the setting. A locked door, a lamp left burning long after its purpose had passed, a document half-finished, a poker unmarked. These things seldom occur together by coincidence." Mrs. Fremantle's fingers twitched slightly. "You think he was murdered?" "I think someone was at pains to make it appear otherwise." She looked away toward the window. The dog trembled. Whimsy approached the fireplace and ran a hand along the empty grate. "Odd, isn't it," he mused, "that the study remained unheated this morning, given the frost on the ground. A gentleman of Sir Julian's vintage would surely not choose to compose documents in a cold room, unless, of course, he was not doing the composing himself." Thorn coughed meaningfully. "Did you see Sir Julian last night, ma'am?" She hesitated just long enough to be noticed. "He came down late, well past 10. I'd already retired. I heard him in the passage. He often paced when anxious." "And you heard no one else?" Whimsy asked. "No. Why should I?" She straightened slightly. "This is not some village inn. The staff retires by 10. Olivia had gone to bed by 9:30, I believe." "The niece," said Whimsy. "Yes. I must make her acquaintance." "And the staff?" "Only Cook and Fletcher live in. The others lodge in the village." Her voice had become brisker, more composed. "Surely you don't think the servants had anything to do with this?" "Julian was not—" "He was not beloved, but he paid his staff well and treated them with respect." "Respect can take many forms, ma'am," Whimsy said, tilting his head. "And sometimes the most fastidious cruelty is done with the softest voice. I don't imply anything sinister. Yet. Only that everyone has secrets, especially the deceased. I'm sure, she said stiffly. If you speak to Olivia, she will tell you the same. Whimsy bowed. One hopes not, Mrs. Fremantle. If everyone tells me the same story, it is very likely a lie. He let the remark linger, watching her expression. But she had recovered her poise and merely rang the bell for the butler. Have Miss Harrow fetched, she said. Lord Peter Wimsey would like a word. Miss Olivia Harrow was 25, thin as a lath, and looked as though she had once been pretty and recently forgotten how. She wore a green cardigan with a missing button and clutched a notebook as if it were a crucifix. Her eyes, large and grey, shifted nervously from Whimsy to Thorn as she perched at the edge of a chair like a girl summoned before a headmistress. Miss Harrow, said Whimsy, smiling, you live here with your aunt and uncle, I understand. I do, she said, with a voice pitched oddly flat. Uncle Julian was my mother's brother. Were you fond of him? She blinked. He paid for my schooling. That was not the question. A pause. No, he could be difficult, always watching, always correcting. Whimsy gave a small, appreciative nod. It's a terrible thing to feel constantly under surveillance, Miss Harrow. Did he ever give you cause to fear him? She hesitated. Not in any real way. He had expectations. He wanted me to read law at Cambridge, but I prefer drawing. Illustration, mostly. He thought it a waste of time. I'm sure the Guild of St. Luke would disagree. Now, last night, what did you do after supper? I went upstairs early. I wasn't feeling well. I've had this headache for days. Did you hear anything from the study? Voices? Footsteps? I thought I heard someone moving about near midnight, but it might have been the wind. This house makes odd noises. Indeed it does. Did you notice whether the lamp in the study was lit then? No, she said, then frowned. Though there was a strange glow, I think. Through the transom, I assumed Uncle Julian was reading. And was the door locked? I couldn't say. Whimsy stepped back. Did you by chance enter the study at any point in the morning before Fletcher raised the alarm? No, I don't go in there. It smells of old paper and varnish. Ah, and perhaps of linseed oil? He asked casually. She looked startled. Yes, that's it. Linseed. He used it for polishing the desk, I think. A fastidious man, your uncle. Even in death he seems to have ensured his surroundings remained well oiled. Olivia gave a nervous little laugh, then dropped her notebook. Whimsy stooped to retrieve it, but paused. One page was folded back, revealing a quick sketch in pencil. A man at a desk, slumped, a lamp still burning. The lines were spare but exact. Beside it, in neat hand, was written, "The light was wrong. There should have been no shadow." He handed it back without comment. "A hobby," she murmured. "A very precise one," said Whimsy. By mid-afternoon, Whimsy had spoken to Fletcher, the butler, who insisted he had locked up as usual by 10:30, seen no one enter or leave the study, and discovered the body when Sir Julian failed to appear for his morning eggs. The key had been in the door, turned on the inside. The windows were barred and bolted. The fire grate was empty, and the hearthrug had been vacuumed just the day before. "No soot, no mess, no mystery," said Fletcher. "Except the man being dead, of course." "No mystery," Whimsy echoed. "My dear Fletcher, the whole room is a mystery. The kind that pretends to be dull, that's always the most dangerous sort." They stood once more in the study. Thorn paced, glancing at his notes. Could be suicide after all. A staged one, yes, but perhaps some elaborate scheme to expose an old grudge? A final act of petty vengeance? "Possible," said Whimsy, "but unlikely. No letter, no witness, no symbolism, and no effort to die quickly, no poison, no gun. Only a poker that was never used, and a lamp that burned beyond its cue." He paused beside the desk, touching the ink pot. "Dried." Long before dawn. He looked up. Thorn, if you had to stage a locked room death, what would you do? Stage it? Thorn frowned. Well, I suppose I'd need a second key, or a way of locking the door from outside. Exactly, said Whimsy. And what would you need if you wanted everyone to believe the victim was working late and died in the act of writing? An unfinished letter, a lamp, perhaps. Perhaps, said Whimsy softly, but perhaps too much. He turned toward the hearth. And yet no one has asked the simplest question. What's that? Whimsy smiled. Why did Sir Julian, an obsessive man who hated disorder, leave a lamp burning through the night when he was already dead? Lord Peter lingered in the study long after Thorn had taken himself off to browbeat the cook for her lack of insight into Sir Julian's emotional state. He crouched again near the hearth, examining the faint stain beneath the desk. Not blood, not exactly. More like a darkened varnish bloom, as though something had been spilled and hurriedly wiped. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small penknife. With the delicate precision of a man inspecting an ancient manuscript, he scraped lightly at the edge of the mark, lifting a fine curling flake of polish and dust. He held it to his nose, sniffed, and then gave a small, soundless hum. Linseed. But not merely polish. Paint. A varnished pigment, not domestic polish alone. He slipped the flake into an envelope and returned it to his pocket, straightening slowly. The desk itself had been cleared with the deceptive neatness of a stage set. Blotter, 2 fountain pens, 1 bone-handled letter opener, a single sheet of foolscap, half covered in blocky handwriting and curiously poor grammar, not Sir Julian's as he remembered it. Whimsy leaned closer, studying the lines. My client's proposal is untenable in the eyes of the Crown. Legal precedent forbids alienation of estate by... He raised his eyebrows. It read more like a parody of legalese than a genuine letter. The phrasing was too general, the handwriting uncertain. Had it been dictated or forged entirely? Behind him, the door creaked, no knock, and Fletcher entered carrying a silver tray with tea and brandy, each in crystal that caught the light from the window like contraband. If your lordship requires anything further, just this, said Whimsy, turning. You mentioned earlier you saw no one enter or leave the study after Sir Julian came down last night. That's correct, my lord. But were you awake all night? I was not, said Fletcher stiffly. I retire at 10, as does Cook. Sir Julian was usually the last to bed. Indeed. And when you came down this morning, did you notice the lamp immediately? Fletcher hesitated. I noticed it when I opened the door, yes. It was still lit. No odd smells in the room. The man shifted, uncertain. Perhaps something slightly acrid, but these older lamps sometimes give off a scent when left burning. Said Whimsy. And before you leave, one last detail. Do you know whether Sir Julian had any dealings with artists? Illustrators, perhaps? Fletcher blinked. Artists, my lord? Yes, or anyone who might have brought linseed oil into the house, besides the usual cleaning supplies. The butler frowned. Well, Miss Olivia does paint, I believe. Though more sketching than oils, I think. She keeps her things in the attic room, her little studio, she calls it. Whimsy's interest sharpened, though he kept his tone idle. Would you be so good as to show me this studio? Fletcher hesitated. Well, it's really not my place, but if your lordship insists, I do. The attic stair was narrow and steep, with the unpleasant quality of being built for legs both longer and shorter than modern proportions, an architectural indecision that nearly caused Whimsy to knock his hate against the slanted ceiling. Fletcher opened the door at the top and stood back. It was a small space, warm despite the draught, with a northern window that cast a colorless glow across the cluttered room. Sketchbooks lay open on the floor. Several canvases, none larger than a writing desk, leaned against the far wall, most unfinished. One showed the faint outline of a seated man, viewed from behind. His head was tilted to one side as though listening. The lines were rough, hurried, but unmistakably based on someone familiar. Whimsy crossed to the easel and tilted a small glass bottle, half filled with a thick, yellowing liquid. "Linseed," he murmured. "Used for thinning paint and binding color. Dangerous in enclosed spaces. Flammable, prone to spontaneous ignition if left on cloth. And yet so very useful." There was a smear on the easel's edge, a reddish-brown substance dried to a hard edge. Fletcher lingered by the door, uncomfortable. "My lord, might I ask, do you believe Miss Olivia—" "No," said Whimsy gently. "I don't believe anything yet. But she saw something, perhaps more than she meant to, and artists, like detectives, have a terrible habit of observing detail." He paused, gazing at the sketch of the man at the desk. The angle was precise, the slope of the shoulders, the positioning of the lamp, but the shadow, cast toward the left of the canvas, implied the light source had been altered. A puzzle forming, a lamp that should not have burned, a shadow that should not have fallen. He turned back to the butler. "Fletcher, you seem a man of routine. Did Sir Julian ever permit visitors to the house after supper?" "Very rarely. He preferred his correspondence to be conducted by post. On occasion, Miss Harrow's tutor would visit, but that was during the day." "Her tutor?" "Yes. Mr. Braithwaite. He teaches drawing at the local academy. A rather theatrical fellow, if I may say so." "Does he live in the village?" "No, my lord. He lodges at the King's Head in Manton." "Thorn should be told," said Whimsy, more to himself than to Fletcher. "Yes, I think I should like a word with Mr. Braithwaite before too long, and perhaps a closer look at Miss Harrow's sketches." He picked up the notebook she'd dropped earlier. The pages fluttered with restless lines. Notebooks are so often confessional. One page showed the hallway, complete with framed portraits, another, the study door from a skewed angle, and on the last page, a figure crouching before the hearth, rendered with uncanny accuracy. Himself. The line was dated that morning, so she had watched. But when? He closed the book and returned it carefully to the desk. Back downstairs, Whimsy caught Thorn in the act of interrogating Cook about a misplaced silver salver. "Not the point, Thorn," he said lightly, "though I'm sure the silver will turn up. Thieves of old plate are rarely tidy about their motives. But I've a few matters of more immediate interest." Thorn scowled. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't go about the house lifting clues like a parlor magician." "And yet I bring gifts," Whimsy replied. "Miss Harrow has a studio in the attic. She paints, badly but sincerely, and uses linseed oil, which accounts for the smell in the study. More importantly, she has drawn what appears to be Sir Julian's body at the desk, though with a curious inconsistency in the lighting." "You think she saw something?" "I think she saw more than she understood. Perhaps someone tampering with the scene after the fact. And there's a tutor, Braithwaite, who might be worth a conversation. He may have visited last night, without the staff seeing." "Easily enough. A back door, a familiar excuse, a brief window before the household settled down. And if someone came to confront Sir Julian, or threaten him, or stage something more elaborate, well, we shall see." Thorn grunted. "We still don't know how the door was locked from the inside." "No," said Whimsy, "but I suspect we're asking the wrong question. Not how it was locked, but when." He turned to go, smiling faintly. "I think I shall take a walk before tea. Perhaps Miss Harrow will join me. Artists often talk better outdoors." And as he passed once more through the long, dim corridor, the oil lamp now extinguished, he touched the door of the study lightly, almost with affection. "A stage set," he murmured, "and someone took very great pains to light it just so." The wind had taken on a bitter edge by the time Lord Peter and Miss Olivia Harrow crossed into the walled garden behind the east wing. The sun, wan and low, bled through bare-branched yews and the spindly arms of a dying rose trellis. Olivia walked with her hands in her coat pockets, jaw slightly set, chin raised in a way that bespoke neither defiance nor confidence, but rather the sort of brittle composure children learn in unpleasant households. Whimsy, hands clasped behind his back, was whistling, quietly, tunelessly, as if to himself. He paused by a bench half overgrown with ivy and turned to her, gently interrupting her silence. "A charming little composition you sketched this morning," he said. "I particularly admired the tension in the shoulder line of the subject. Myself, I believe, squatting in dramatic communion with the fireplace." She flushed faintly. "I didn't mean... Only, you looked so odd, crouched there, like a bird over a scrap of paper." "Art imitates life," he murmured. "And life, like a good detective, knows how to keep still at the right moment. Tell me, Miss Harrow, did you draw Sir Julian often?" She gave a short laugh, entirely without humor. "Hardly. He didn't like being looked at, not even when he was alive. Especially not then." "Ah, the living do have such awkward objections," said Whimsy. "But you did sketch him yesterday, didn't you? Sitting at his desk?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I was in the corridor after supper. He didn't know I was there." "At what hour was this?" "About 8. I'd come down for a book, left it in the parlor. I heard him moving in the study and looked through the door. It wasn't shut. He was sitting just like that. Lamp on, writing something. I don't think he noticed me." "And you sketched him later?" "Yes, from memory. But not entirely," Whimsy said gently. "You captured the shadow on the floor too precisely, thrown to the left, which suggests the lamp was placed to the right. And yet when Fletcher found him this morning, the lamp was on the left-hand side of the desk." She looked startled. Yes, I drew what I saw. I didn't think it was important." "Most things are unimportant," said Whimsy cheerfully, "until they are. You see, Miss Harrow, someone changed the position of that lamp after Sir Julian was dead. Someone tampered with the scene, possibly to make it look like he died while working, comfortably, habitually, even mundanely. But your drawing, made from life, suggests otherwise." She looked away. "Why would anyone bother?" "Ah, now that," said Whimsy with relish, "is the first intelligent question anyone's asked today." "Why indeed?" "A change in lamp placement may seem trifling, but trifles, as dear Sherlock would say, are infinitely the most important things. They suggest someone who cared very much about appearances, perhaps to suggest natural death, or to conceal something that had already been disturbed." Her breath clouded in the cold. "I didn't see anyone go in. I swear I didn't." "No, but perhaps you heard something." She frowned, sifting memory. "There was a sound. Not loud. A kind of metallic thud, just before I turned to go back upstairs. I thought it might be the latch dropping." "The study door?" "Yes. But Fletcher says it was locked this morning." She looked at him sharply. "Do you think it was locked after the body was found?" "I think," said Whimsy slowly, "that the door was never locked at all. Not in the way one supposes. A key turned, yes, but from the outside. A simple trick, really. I demonstrated it to Thurkell on Snodbury's Amateur Dramatics Club in 23. A string through the keyhole, a stiff wire, a steady hand, and one may lock a door as easily as one ties a cravat. One need only do it after the room is empty, or after the performance has concluded." Her eyes widened slightly. "So it was all staged." "That is the implication. What one wants now is a motive, a method, and, ideally, an inconvenient eyewitness. You, Miss Harrow, may be the last person to have seen Sir Julian alive. Was he agitated?" She hesitated. "No. But he was dressed unusually. He always wore his old blue smoking jacket in the evenings. But last night he had on his full dinner suit, even a tie. That was odd." "Very odd," Whimsy agreed. "Dressing for death, perhaps, or for company." He paused. "Have you ever heard of a Mr. Braithwaite?" Her mouth thinned. "Yes, he taught me sketching last year. He still comes by sometimes." "Did he come yesterday?" "No, at least I don't think so." Whimsy regarded her, thoughtful. "Would you mind if I had a quick word with him?" "I suppose not," she said after a pause. "But he doesn't know anything. He didn't like Sir Julian." "Nobody did." "Well," said Whimsy with a smile, "that's practically a recommendation." The King's Head in Manton was the sort of establishment that advertised game, pies, lukewarm port, and rooms with character, by which one inferred a draught and curious plumbing. Braithwaite, when located, was sitting in the common room with a splayed sketch-pad and a glass of something yellow and uninspiring. He was of middle height, florid, and possessed a beard with definite ambitions toward Mephistopheles. His fingers were long, stained, and expressive. "I knew he'd end badly," he said with relish, once Whimsy introduced himself. "Julian Harrow was the kind of man who poisoned rooms. You know the type: old money, old pride, old hatreds, a living relic. And yet you taught his ward." "Olivia? Yes. Talented girl. Tense. Hasn't been properly trained, but a good eye. The old man didn't approve of art. Thought it immoral, I expect. Did you visit the hall yesterday?" "Not me. Why?" "Routine," said Whimsy airily. "What can you tell me about Olivia's family?" Braithwaite snorted. "Practically non-existent. Her mother died years ago. Her father vanished. India or some kind of mess abroad. Julian took her in, but always treated her like a guest who'd outstayed her welcome. And her inheritance? She's got none, as far as I know. Harrow kept everything under lock and ledger, probably hoped to leave it to some society for the promotion of Anglican architecture." Whimsy made a note of that. "You didn't happen to paint? Oils, perhaps?" "Me? Watercolor, mostly. Oils are a nuisance, and expensive." Whimsy nodded, satisfied. "One final thing, Mr. Braithwaite. Do you know if Sir Julian was expecting any visitors yesterday evening?" Braithwaite's eyes narrowed. "No, but he did receive a letter the day before. Looked agitated afterward. Crumpled it in his coat pocket. I passed him on the road, nearly ran me down." "And did you see the letter?" "No, only the envelope. Cream, thick, expensive?" "Handwritten." "Was it addressed to the hall?" "No. Oddly enough, it said, 'To be delivered by hand.' The postmaster told me." Whimsy gave a low whistle. "Curiosa and curiosa." He stood, offering his card. "Thank you, Mr. Braithwaite. If you should recall anything else, particularly regarding letters, linseed, or locked doors, do let me know." And as he stepped back into the lane, the wind sharper now, he could not help but smile. A girl who sketches shadows that shouldn't be. A man dressed for visitors who never came, or who came too late. A letter never posted, and a door locked as a final flourish. Yes, he thought, someone had gone to great length to stage this death as though it had meaning, and meaning was always where the murderer lived. The sky had dimmed to a pearly dusk by the time Lord Peter returned to Harrow Hall. The frost clung with increasing insistence to the high iron gates, which groaned faintly as he let himself in. He paused a moment, casting a long glance toward the east wing. A single window glowed, faintly. Olivia's, if he remembered the layout aright. The rest of the hall loomed dark, forbidding, like a fortress grown weary of its own secrets. Inside, the scent of wood smoke lingered from the now cold hearth, mingled with something metallic and faintly sweet. An odor most would not notice, but which to Whimsy smacked faintly of blood and oil. Fletcher met him in the hall with a subdued, professional gravity. "Inspector Frimley has been and gone, my lord. Said he would await your report before proceeding further. Good fellow, Frimley. He understands the delicate art of under-policing. Keeps the riff-raff from muddying the footprints," said Whimsy lightly, removing his gloves. Have you by chance kept all the household staff under reasonable surveillance? They've not left the grounds, Fletcher replied. The cook's confined to her domain, the scullery maid's weeping in the laundry, and Perkins is in the butler's pantry, polishing the same salver for the third time. Splendid, said Wimsey. A still salver gathers no suspicion, but an over-polished one might reflect the guilty conscience of its keeper. I think I shall begin with Perkins. The butler was a lean elderly man whose spine had adopted the semi-permanent curvature of subservience. He was not, however, one to be flustered easily, except, perhaps, when faced with Wimsey's peculiar brand of insouciant scrutiny. "Perkins," said Wimsey, after greeting him with a brief nod, "I am not by nature a man who believes in metaphysical interference, but I confess that the events surrounding Sir Julian's death do tempt the imagination. Would you, as a long-serving guardian of this venerable estate, say there has ever been? Well, anything unseemly about the East Wing?" Perkins blinked. "Not unseemly, my lord, but Sir Julian kept it to himself. Always locked the study and never let the maids in to clean. Said it disrupted his concentration. Quite right. One cannot compose vitriolic letters to the editor or revise a heretical treatise on pre-Raphaelite allegory with someone flicking a feather duster about." Wimsey paused. "Did he have any visitors yesterday?" "Only Miss Harrow, as far as I know. And she didn't stay long." "No one else came through the front?" "No, my lord, though I did hear something. Late in the evening, clattering in the back corridor." Wimsey's interest sharpened. "Back corridor?" "Yes, sir. Connects the service passage to the old nursery wing. Nobody uses it now, it's half boarded up. But I distinctly heard someone moving through it. Not heavy footsteps, more like something being dragged." "Dragged," said Wimsey thoughtfully. "How very Gothic." Perkins had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I went to look, but by the time I got there, nothing. Just a cold draught and the smell of polish." "Did Sir Julian take walks at night?" "Not in winter, sir. He was too afraid of catching pneumonia. Besides, he never walked alone after dark. He disliked shadows." Wimsey smiled. "So don't we all?" "Thank you, Perkins. You've been immensely helpful." He left the butler to his polishing and retraced his steps to the eastern passage, the one Olivia had sketched so precisely. The corridor smelled faintly of camphor and dust. He moved slowly, observing the marks on the floorboards. Old drag patterns, perhaps, but not undisturbed. Near the threshold to the back corridor, he bent down and examined a scuff, blackened and recent. He reached into his coat, produced a small folding lens, and studied the edge. "Aha," he murmured. "Heel scrape. Woman's boot. But whose?" He moved further down the corridor and opened a narrow door leading into what had once been the nursery wing. The air was colder here, stale with disuse. The walls bore faded murals, bucolic scenes of cherubs and lambs that had decayed into unsettling parodies of innocence. A small brass plaque still read Miss Olivia Harrow above a warped doorway. Inside, the room was spare. An abandoned easel stood in one corner. The bed had been stripped. Only a small cupboard remained intact. Wimsey opened it and found, oddly, an envelope taped to the back of the door. He peeled it free. There was no name on the outside. Inside, a single sheet of thick, creamy paper, the same Braithwaite had described. The letter, in a precise, angular hand, read, "You know what must be done. I cannot allow it to be buried again. I kept your secrets once, but the price was too dear. If you do not answer me by Thursday night, I will go to the bishop myself. This is your final warning." No signature. No date. But the postmark on the envelope flap, very faint, suggested it had been sealed recently. Perhaps Tuesday. He folded it carefully and placed it in his breast pocket. Thursday was yesterday, so the letter had been delivered by hand, and Sir Julian had either ignored it or answered it in a manner final and irreversible. He returned to the study and stood by the desk. The lamp was still there, now cold and glowering. He turned it slightly, noting the ring of grime beneath its base. Yes, it had been moved. On a whim, he knelt again and examined the floor, feeling along the carpet seam near the hearth. His fingers closed on something small, hard, a cufflink, gold, square, inscribed E.H. He stared at it, frowning slightly. E.H. Edgar Harrow. But Olivia's father had been presumed dead these 12 years. He rose slowly, thoughtful. If Edgar Harrow were alive, and near enough to leave a cufflink behind, then perhaps this death had more to do with resurrection than murder. Unless, of course, they were the same thing. He went to find Olivia again. She was in the drawing room, seated before the fire, her sketchbook closed and her hands folded in her lap. She looked up at him, eyes dark in the firelight. "You've found something," she said. "A number of things," he said gently, "including a rather incriminating cufflink." She didn't move. "Then you know. I know that someone threatened your guardian. I know that someone entered his study last night through the back corridor, possibly dragging something, or someone. And I know," he added, "that Sir Julian was expecting someone he dressed for, someone who made him afraid." She lowered her head. "He told me my father was dead." "Yes, but he wasn't, was he?" "No," she said softly. "He came back. Last week." Whimsy sat, watching her face. "Did he kill him?" "I don't know. I didn't see him leave. He said he only wanted to talk, but Sir Julian, he refused. He said father would never see a penny, that he'd expose everything. Father was shaking. I left them. I couldn't listen. And then, I came back later. The study was dark. I thought he'd gone. I didn't go in. But someone did," said Whimsy, "and someone changed the lamp." She didn't answer. Her fingers gripped each other tightly. "You must tell me," he said quietly. "If your father was here, if he was afraid, then we must find him before someone else does. Justice is not improved by secrecy." She looked up. "I think he's hiding in the chapel. It's been locked for years, but he had the key. He said there were things buried there, things that should have come to light long ago." Whimsy stood slowly. "Then I think it's time we paid a call on the dead," he said. The cold was sharper as they stepped out into the night, the kind of clean, implacable cold that bit through wool and bone alike, wrapping Harrow Hall in a silence so complete it seemed manufactured. Frost crackled beneath Whimsy's boots as he crossed the overgrown flagstones that led toward the old chapel, Olivia following a few paces behind, her cloak pulled tightly about her thin frame. The stars overhead were severe and remote, and the moon, barely risen, traced the bare tree limbs in ink-black silhouettes across the ground. "The Harrow family chapel," murmured Whimsy, as they reached the small cruciform building that hunched at the edge of the eastern wood. Always a poor investment, spiritually speaking. Too far from the house for comfort, too near the ancestral tombs for inspiration. The door was indeed locked, but not well. Olivia reached into her reticule and drew out a tarnished iron key, which she turned without hesitation. The hinges resisted with a groan like a man woken rudely from sleep. The interior exhaled damp air and mold. Stained glass windows, once jewel-toned, had grown sickly with lichen and dust. The stone floor bore a thin film of moss in the corners. 2 rows of pews faced a cracked marble altar, above which the figure of a grieving angel, her face eroded by time and pigeons, extended one hand heavenward in mute accusation. Whimsy walked slowly up the aisle, eyes scanning every recess, until he reached the vestry door. He laid his hand on it. No resistance. It creaked open. The figure inside did not start. He had evidently heard them coming. A thin man, perhaps once tall, now stooped. His clothes were old but not ragged, and his face, lined and drawn, held the peculiar stillness of one who had long since ceased expecting mercy. In his hand, he held a packet of yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon. "Mr. Harrow," said Whimsy mildly, "we've been expecting you." The man gave a slow nod. "I was never very good at staying hidden." "Then why try?" "Because I needed to see him," Edgar Harrow said. "To tell him what he did, what he stole." "Stole?" Whimsy walked a few steps into the vestry and glanced at the makeshift cot and a cold brazier of coals. "From you?" "No," said Harrow. "From Olivia." There was no tremor in the voice, but Olivia moved closer to Whimsy, as if seeking the reassurance of his shadow. "He told everyone I'd gone mad, that I'd squandered the estate, abandoned my daughter, taken up with foreign women, and disappeared. It wasn't true." "No," said Whimsy. "It never quite smelled true." Edgar's lips twisted. "He forged documents, had me committed for a month under an assumed name in a private clinic, bought off the staff. While I was locked up, he convinced the board to sign over trusteeship. The debts he claimed I owed didn't exist. He created them. For what purpose? To control Olivia, and the inheritance. She doesn't know it, but she was heir to her mother's estate, a trust set aside by her grandfather. Julian hid the records, claimed there was nothing left." Whimsy nodded slowly. "And you had no proof?" "Not until recently." Edgar lifted the packet in his hands. "This is the correspondence between my wife's solicitor and her father. Julian intercepted it, kept it in a locked box. I found it in the chapel crypt of all places, hidden with some of my old journals and a ledger he claimed never existed." "How did you find it?" "I remembered something my wife once said," Edgar said, almost to himself. "That Julian couldn't resist hiding things in plain sight. Inside sacred spaces, she called it. He kept the key to the crypt hidden in his study, behind a false drawer in the lamp base. Took me 3 days to find it." Whimsy's expression flickered. Confirmation of a suspicion formed the moment he saw the lamp turn just so. "And when you confronted him?" Edgar's eyes closed. He laughed, said no one would believe me, that I'd disappear again and no one would bother to ask where. "But he didn't call the police?" "No, I think he meant to deal with me privately. Poison, maybe, or another convenient accident." We argued. He struck me. I left before I could do worse. "And what time was this?" "Just after 9. I took the back corridor. I remembered the old servant's path. I still had the key." "Was he alive when you left him?" "Yes." Whimsy watched him a moment longer. "Then I'm afraid you're in the clear." The old man blinked. "You didn't kill him, Mr. Harrow. Someone else did. Likely someone afraid of what you might have said, or what he might have confessed." Edgar seemed to sag. Then it was all for nothing. "No," said Whimsy, taking the packet from him with careful fingers. "It may be the beginning of everything. Provided this is genuine, and I imagine it is, Olivia is not only innocent of fabrication, but legally entitled to a great deal more than anyone believed. That alone is worth the journey." Edgar's voice trembled. "Do you think she can forgive me?" Whimsy turned to Olivia, who stood motionless in the vestry doorway. She came forward slowly. "I think," she said, "it depends on whether you mean to disappear again." Her father bowed his head. "I'm tired of hiding," he whispered. Whimsy gave them space and wandered into the nave once more, staring up at the defaced angel. His fingers absently toyed with the cufflink in his pocket. If Edgar had entered through the back corridor and fled by the same route, it explained the scuffed heel marks. But the letter, the threat delivered Tuesday, suggested Julian Harrow had been under pressure for more than 1 quarter. And the cufflink? It may well have been dropped in the scuffle, but if Edgar had worn it, why only 1? Why leave it behind? He heard footsteps behind him. "Lord Peter," Olivia said softly. "What happens now?" "We present the documents. We confirm your father's story. And we return to the study, because I believe the murder was committed later than we assumed. After 10. But the lamp? Yes, the lamp was still burning, but that was precisely the point. Whoever killed him wanted us to think he died earlier. They left the light on to fake a continuity of life. An illusion, Miss Harrow, not unlike the family honor so jealously guarded by your late guardian. He glanced once more at the altar, then stepped out into the cold, motioning for them to follow. Back at the hall, the house was quiet. Fletcher had lit a fire in the drawing room, and tea waited, untouched, on a silver tray. Whimsy went straight to the study. Everything remained as before. The cold lamp, the darkened hearth, the tidy desk. He circled the room slowly, eyes skimming along bookshelves, clock faces, furniture feet. He paused by the small locked cabinet beneath the window and produced a set of slim tools from his inner coat pocket. A few minutes of gentle coaxing, and the lock surrendered. Inside, the cabinet was empty, save for a thin folio and, curiously, a small hand mirror, cracked at the edge. He picked it up, turned it in the light, and caught sight of something faint on the reverse. Initials. Once again, E.H. But this was not a man's possession. He took the mirror, back to the drawing room where Olivia waited. "Miss Harrow," he said lightly, "have you ever lent your belongings to anyone? A friend, perhaps?" She frowned. "No. Why?" "Because this mirror, bearing your initials, was found in the study cabinet, hidden, and I doubt your father placed it there." Her eyes widened. "That's not mine. I haven't seen it in years." He nodded. "Then someone wanted it to be found, or perhaps not found, yet failed to take it with them when they fled. Which means they were disturbed or hurried. That, Miss Harrow, is where our murderer made their first and most critical error." He folded the mirror carefully and tucked it into his pocket beside the cufflink. "Tomorrow," he murmured, more to himself than her, "we speak to Mrs. Dalrymple again, and then to our friend the vicar." He turned back toward the fire, eyes thoughtful, as if seeing through time and lies alike, because someone else had been in the house that night, and Lord Peter Wimsey had begun to see precisely who. The morning after broke sharp and colourless, like cracked porcelain under a pallid sky. Lord Peter sat alone in the breakfast room, untouched toast before him, fingers lightly drumming a rhythm against the linen tablecloth. The documents Edgar Harrow had surrendered now lay open beside the marmalade jar, their contents as potent as any confession extracted under oath. Fletcher entered soundlessly and set down a fresh pot of coffee, eyeing the mess with a respectful glance. "No word from the inspector?" Wimsey asked without looking up. "Not yet, my lord." "Then he's being cautious, which suits me." He poured himself a cup, black and steaming. "And Mrs. Dalrymple?" "In the blue parlour, as requested." Wimsey stood, gathered the sheaf of papers, and tucked them neatly beneath one arm. "Very good, Fletcher. You may want to inform the kitchen staff to avoid planning anything celebratory just yet." The blue parlour was a room of modest charm, all soft floral wallpaper and faded damask, with an incongruous grandfather clock that ticked out a reproachful rhythm. Mrs. Dalrymple sat stiffly in a winged chair, hands folded, lips a determined line. She was dressed more plainly than the day before, a sign, perhaps, of mourning, or the instinctive desire to diminish one's silhouette when the light of suspicion begins to warm the skin. "Mrs. Dalrymple," Wimsey said by way of greeting, "thank you for sparing the time. I'll not keep you longer than necessary. It's only that a few details have begun to itch." "Indeed?" she said, coldly polite. "Yes," he replied, sinking into the chair opposite. "It concerns the late Sir Julian, a curious man. Private, yes. Fastidious, but not, I think, without his weaknesses." She said nothing, but her shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I wonder," Wimsey continued, "did you know he kept a mirror? Small, silver-backed, the sort one might slip into a handbag locked in his cabinet." She blinked once, slowly. "A mirror?" "Yes, rather dainty. It bore the initials E.H. inscribed on the back. Now she looked away. He kept many things. He was a collector. Indeed, though I doubt his taste ever extended to ladies' personal accessories, especially ones so intimately monogrammed. A pause stretched between them, thin as glass. "Do you know," he said gently, "what happened the night Sir Julian died?" "I know only what you told me." "Then allow me to fill in a few gaps." He had been threatened by more than one party. Your brother-in-law, for instance, who had recently returned from the dead bearing documents inconvenient to Julian's long-standing deceptions. And then there was the matter of the crypt, the key to which had not left your family since Olivia's mother died. Her voice, when it came, was soft but tight. "That chapel holds nothing but grief." Grief, yes, and evidence. The kind that might unravel a fortune's worth of lies. I imagine Julian found Edgar's reappearance deeply inconvenient. But more than that, he was afraid. He'd spent decades constructing a version of the past, a version that kept him comfortably in control. Then suddenly, the real past walked through the door. Whimsy stood and walked slowly to the fireplace, where the embers had cooled. "What puzzles me, Mrs. Dalrymple, is the timing. According to what we know, Julian was alive at 9, possibly still alive by 10, but dead before midnight. He dressed formally, as if for a meeting, and was found beside his desk, which had been rearranged." He turned. "Did you see him that night?" She hesitated too long. "Yes," she said. "Briefly." "At what time?" "Just before 10. "And what was said?" "He asked if I had seen Olivia. I hadn't. He looked exhausted. He said he needed to set things right. I thought he meant a letter." "A letter?" "He'd drafted one to the Bishop of Ely, about the trust. He said it was time Olivia knew the truth, that Edgar had returned." Whimsy's brows lifted. "So he meant to come clean?" "I think so," she said, "but something frightened him, or changed his mind." Whimsy considered this. "You said you hadn't seen Olivia, but you didn't say you hadn't seen anyone else." A flicker, barely more than a breath, crossed her face. He caught it. "Mrs. Dalrymple, did your daughter come to the study that night?" "She was out walking. She often walks late. She says the air helps her think." "That's not what I asked." "No," she said finally. "Yes, she came in, just after me." "Did she speak to Julian?" "I don't know. I left before they finished." Whimsy paced slowly, thoughtfully. "Your daughter, Eloise, very devoted to her uncle, raised here after her father died, or disappeared, a child of this house. And yet—" He withdrew the cufflink from his pocket and held it up. "Do you recognize this?" She stared. "It's Eloise's. She had them made when she began at Girton." Whimsy nodded. "It was found near the hearth, hidden beneath the carpet. She dropped it, or rather, it was torn free, likely in a struggle." Mrs. Dalrymple's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "I'm afraid so. I believe your daughter went to confront Sir Julian, not out of curiosity, but desperation. I believe she feared Olivia would gain everything, and she nothing. After all, she believed herself next of kin. She is family. And Olivia is not?" Whimsy's voice was low. "Sir Julian was going to amend the record, perhaps even offer restitution. Your daughter discovered this, and in that moment, years of quiet resentment, of being passed over, came to a boil." "No," Mrs. Dalrymple said again, but her voice was hollow. "Someone reversed the lamp to suggest he was still working after 10. Someone dragged the carpet to cover a stain. Someone left behind both a cufflink and a mirror." Her hands trembled. "She was always so clever, so calm. I thought it was grief." "It was envy," said Whimsy, not unkindly, "and fear, but not very well hidden." The door opened. Fletcher stepped in. "Inspector Frimley is here, my lord." "Thank you. Ask him to wait 1 minute more." He turned to Mrs. Dalrymple. "I will not press her now, but the evidence is sufficient. Let her speak for herself. It may yet matter." As he left the room, he saw Olivia standing silently in the hall, her father seated behind her, slumped and unreadable. Whimsy offered her the faintest of smiles. "Prepare yourself," he said softly. "The rest will come quickly." And with that, he stepped into the cold light of justice as the door to the past swung finally shut behind them. The sitting room where Eloise Dalrymple now waited was warm, but her hands were cold. They rested, one over the other, on her lap, pale and unmoving. Her eyes fixed themselves on a point beyond the heavy drapery, as if the garden beyond offered some path of escape that the house itself could not. Whimsy watched her from the doorway for a moment before entering. She did not turn her head. Whether from pride or from resignation, it was impossible to tell. "You know why I'm here, Miss Dalrymple," he said quietly. Her chin lifted by a fraction. "I assume you've come to accuse me." "I'm not a policeman. I come to ask questions." "But you already believe you know the answers." He approached slowly and sat in the chair across from her. "Belief," he said, "is a poor foundation for justice. Let's speak instead of what you believe." She finally looked at him then, with eyes too tired for defiance. "I believe," she said, "that no one will understand." "Try me." Eloise folded her arms. "It was never about money. That's what people will think. That I killed him for an inheritance. But I would have had nothing either way. Olivia's trust, what my uncle concealed for years, was always meant for her. I knew that." Whimsy tilted his head. "Then what was it about?" "Power." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Julian controlled everything. Everyone. My mother lived in fear of his disappointment. I grew up in the shadows of his judgment, his patronage. I didn't love him. Not really. But I believed for a time that he valued me. And then I saw it. When Olivia returned. When she began asking questions. When my uncle looked at her the way he used to look at me, before I asked too many questions of my own." Her eyes darkened. "I had dreams once. Cambridge, yes. But more than that. Lectures, research, travel. And when I told him, he laughed, said such ideas were charming, like a child who wants to be a queen. Then he withdrew the allowance I didn't know I depended on." Whimsy nodded slowly. "So when you learned he intended to restore Olivia's position," I snapped. He said nothing, and in the silence, her words gathered momentum. "I went to the study around 10. I hadn't meant—" Her throat caught. "We argued. He said cruel things. Said I should be grateful he had kept me after my father left. As if I were a dog." She looked away. I slapped him. He caught my wrist. I reached for the lamp to pull it away, to stop him, and it struck him. Harder than I meant. He fell back. I thought he was just dazed. But then I saw the blood. Her fingers tightened. I panicked. I couldn't think. I adjusted the rug, turned the lamp back on, to make it seem as though he'd lived longer. And then I left. Whimsy's voice was calm. "And the mirror?" "It was in my coat pocket. I used it to fix my hair just before I entered. I must have dropped it while I moved the lamp. I didn't notice." "And the cufflink?" My wrist caught on the arm of the chair. The link snapped. Her composure began to unravel. "I wasn't thinking. I only wanted it to seem as though nothing had happened." "But you returned to the room later?" She nodded. "I thought maybe I could recover what I'd dropped. The mirror, at least, but Fletcher was in the hall. I couldn't risk it." Whimsy leaned forward. "You understand what this means?" "Yes." He waited, letting the silence stretch long enough to be unbearable. "And your mother?" "She suspected," Eloise said hoarsely. "She asked me and I lied, but she knew. That's why she tried to shield me, because she believed Julian had broken something in me." Whimsy stood slowly. You've confessed voluntarily. That will matter, but the law must follow its course." She said nothing more. As he left the room, Fletcher appeared at his shoulder. "The inspector's in the drawing-room, my lord." "Good," Wimsey said. "He'll want to take Miss Dalrymple's statement." Fletcher hesitated. "Miss Harrow is in the conservatory. She's asked for you." Wimsey found Olivia standing by the frost-blurred glass, her hands folded, gaze lost among the wintering hedgerows. "She did it, didn't she?" she said without turning. "Yes. I thought so. Last night, when I saw her speaking with my father, I felt something cold move in the air. She looked at him the way Julian used to look at me." Wimsey joined her, saying nothing. "What happens to her now?" she asked. "She'll be charged," he said, "but the court will see a history of pressure. A woman's life shaped by control and condescension. It may make them merciful. She's not evil." "No," said Wimsey. "She's human. And this house, this family, has demanded too much of too many." Olivia finally looked at him, and for the first time since they met, her expression was unguarded. "And what happens to us?" she asked softly. "To me, and my father." Wimsey studied her face, the storm of exhaustion there, and the flicker of hope behind it. "That depends," he said gently, "on what you want to build from what remains." Behind them, the first light of morning spilled across the floor, soft and grey and clean. And though the shadows of Harrow Hall would remain etched in its stones for years to come, something in the stillness suggested a door had finally opened. Not into the past, but beyond it. Inspector Frimley was a man of doughy complexion and firm procedures, which he brought with him into the morning room with the air of one importing order to chaos. He had just taken Eloise Dalrymple's formal statement, and now stood, hat in hand, speaking with Wimsey in a low, respectful tone, while Fletcher made a show of removing the tea service and pretending not to overhear. "Miss Dalrymple was composed," Frimley said, "if you're wondering. Too composed, perhaps. I've seen women confess with tears and shrieks, and I've seen them calm as nuns at vespers. The calm ones, I find, are often more dangerous." Wimsey raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous, Inspector? She's already done the worst thing a person can do, and I should hardly think she'll be stabbing anyone else on the prison ward." Frimley frowned, unused to having his official adjectives rewritten mid-report. "Well," he said, with professional stiffness, "I shall be taking her to the station shortly. I've advised her to retain a solicitor. Her mother's provided the name of someone in Ely." Wimsey nodded. A prudent step. They were silent for a moment. Then Frimley glanced toward the hallway. "Miss Harrow seems the forgiving sort." "Possibly," Wimsey said. "But she's also the kind who'll carry the wound where no one can see it, deep like a fish-hook under the skin." Frimley gave a grunt that could have been agreement or mere lack of words. "There's one thing I've not puzzled out," he said, shifting his stance. "If Miss Dalrymple dropped the mirror and the cufflinks snapped off, why didn't she try to recover them? The mirror especially. It's distinctive." "She did try," Wimsey replied. "But she was interrupted. Still odd, isn't it?" Wimsey turned slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Inspector, are you familiar with Chekhov's principle of theatrical economy?" Frimley blinked. "The playwright?" "Just so. If you introduce a loaded pistol in Act 1, it must go off in Act 3. One could say the same of a mirror. If a thing is left behind, it must be found." "But why?" Frimley stared at him blankly. Wimsey gave a small, apologetic smile. "What I mean is this. Eloise may not have meant to leave the mirror at all." "Then who did?" Wimsey crossed to the desk, picked up the evidence envelope containing the small silver compact. He held it delicately, like a scholar with a medieval manuscript. "Miss Dalrymple said she used it before entering her uncle's study, that she had it in her pocket. But it's a lady's mirror, not a small one. In a coat pocket it would bulge, unless the coat was tailored for it." He turned the mirror over. Initials, E.H. Frimley frowned. Eloise Harrow. No, Whimsy said softly. Edgar Harrow. Frimley gave a short, incredulous laugh. Come now, my lord. A gentleman with a silver vanity mirror? Bit odd, even for this crowd. Whimsy looked up, and the blue of his eyes had that peculiar gleam it took on when the machinery within had whirred to life. Edgar Harrow was a man who disappeared for 20 years and returned with documents of extreme convenience, who arrived unannounced, accepted as Olivia's father on the strength of a faded passport and a face no one remembered. Did you see his hands? I did. Shook one. Clean, soft, uncalloused. Well, he said he was an archivist, books and such. Indeed. But consider the curious balance of this tale. Julian hides the trust. Edgar returns. Julian intends to confess. Edgar dissuades him, gently, perhaps, but firmly. Then Julian dies, and Edgar, now in a house of wealth, does not depart. Frimley's eyes narrowed. Are you saying he planted the mirror? I'm saying the mirror may not belong to Eloise at all, but it has the same initials. Precisely the kind of thing one might exploit, given the opportunity. Frimley shook his head slowly, troubled now. You think Harrow? I think, said Whimsy, it's time we paid him another visit. They found him in the chapel again, just as before, standing beside the family crypt with his head slightly bowed. He looked up as they entered, and for the first time, Whimsy thought he saw something alert behind the man's habitual sadness, something measured and wary. My lord, he said. Inspector. You do favor the dead, Whimsy said lightly. Most men prefer breakfast. I find the chapel peaceful, a sentiment Julian might have echoed, had he not died there. Edgar inclined his head. Whimsy stepped forward. We've taken a statement from Eloise, a full confession. I'm sorry to hear it, Harrow said. She seemed a thoughtful girl. Not always the same as being innocent, Whimsy murmured. Tell me, do you recognize this? He held out the mirror. Edgar took it. His face gave nothing away. Of course, it was my wife's. A gift, I carried it with me for years. Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Unusual keepsake, for a man. I missed her, Edgar said. Is that so hard to believe? Not at all. Love makes collectors of us all. But why was it in Julian's study? Edgar paused. I don't know. Perhaps Eloise borrowed it, or Olivia. And why does it bear your initials, not Olivia's mother's? Another pause. A hair longer. Because she changed her name when we married. I had it engraved after our wedding. Whimsy smiled faintly. You know, I looked up ship records last night. A little insomnia, nothing serious. But I was curious. There is no Edgar Harrow on any passenger manifest matching your return. There were errors in documentation. Of course, and no record of an archivist named Edgar Harrow employed by the Archdiocese of Arles in 1924, 1925, or thereafter. Edgar's hand tightened slightly on the mirror. Who are you, Mr. Harrow? Silence. Then, slowly, Edgar looked up. Does it matter? He said very quietly. Julian is dead. Olivia has her inheritance. Justice, in its strange English way, is done. Whimsy's voice was low and razor-sharp. It matters because Eloise may hang for a murder she committed only partly. And because you, sir, I believe, did the rest. Edgar closed his eyes. Julian promised to restore her name. That was all I asked, but then he changed his mind. He said she would destroy the family, that my name had no place in this house. Whimsy stepped forward. You weren't her father? No, said the man. Not Edgar Harrow now, but someone else entirely. I loved her mother. That part was true. I was the man she turned to when Julian used her and cast her off. But I was not the one she married. She died, and the child was taken. I followed from a distance. I became Harrow because it was the only name the lawyers would open the door to. You returned, Whimsy said, to make her whole, to make her his again. Not Julian's. Mine. Frimley stepped forward. You'll need to come with us, sir. The man, his name now lost to propriety and time, nodded. He laid the mirror gently on the crypt. For her, he said, I'd have done worse. Whimsy watched him go without expression. Outside the air was clean with winter, and the sharp tang of wood smoke lingered. Whimsy stood alone in the courtyard, listening to the engine of the departing car recede into the trees. He spoke, aloud, to no one. Even now, he said softly, the lamp still burns, but not for light, only memory. And then, like a man waking from a long and troubling dream, he turned and walked into the thawing world. Later that afternoon, the snow began again, not heavily, but with the deliberate insistence of a season unwilling to retreat. The sky turned a dusty pearl gray, and the house seemed, for the first time, to sigh rather than brood. It was as if the sharpness of tragedy had dulled into something quieter, a melancholy that threaded the air like chimney smoke, visible, lingering, impossible to sweep away. Lord Peter Whimsy, who had not yet rung for lunch, stood before the fire in the study, holding a glass of whiskey with the absent air of one waiting for something that might not come. His hat was on the desk. His coat, now slightly powdered with snow, hung over the back of the leather armchair. He had returned from the chapel a little after 1, having left the impostor in Frimley's capable custody. Miss Dalrymple had been transferred as well, and the house, once echoing with voices and pretense, now felt like an exhausted theatre after the curtain's fall. He heard the soft steps before he saw her. Olivia Harrow entered with the hesitant poise of someone who knew the boundaries of grief, but had not yet decided how to observe them. She wore no hat, and her hair, dark, loose, slightly windblown, looked very much like the photograph of her mother that still stood on the writing bureau by the window. "You've stayed longer than necessary, Lord Peter," she said. Her voice had changed. It had lost its uncertainty, and now carried a steadiness that seemed foreign to her earlier manner. "Necessary, Miss Harrow," he replied, "is a devilishly complex thing to define. Though I'll admit I don't generally haunt murder scenes past the point of revelation." She came to stand beside him, her eyes on the fire. "I didn't thank you," she said, "for what you did, or didn't do." He smiled faintly. "You'd rather I'd gone on believing the tale as given. Eloise the avenger, Julian the villain, and Mr. Harrow the sorrowful penitent?" "No," she said after a pause. "Only, I thought I knew the shape of things. I'd arranged it all very carefully in my mind. But then it turned out I didn't even know my own father." Whimsy was silent. "I called him Papa," she said softly. "He corrected me the first time. Said it made him feel like an amateur actor in a cheap farce. I thought it was charming." "It was calculated," Whimsy said gently. "He wanted you to like him, but not love him too quickly. It would have looked unnatural. You sound as if you admire him." Whimsy shrugged. "I admire precision," and he had it. His deception was exquisitely managed, not flamboyant, not too earnest, just plausible enough. "I dare say if Julian hadn't intended to confess, if Eloise hadn't confronted him, your guest might still be at your fireside, reading the Times." She flinched a little. "And you would never have known. But then," he added with his driest smile, "few of us do. Not really." She turned toward him. "Do you believe he loved my mother?" "I believe he believed he did," Whimsy said. "And he loved the idea of restoring what Julian destroyed. There was justice in it, twisted though it became." "And Eloise?" "She struck the blow," Whimsy said. "But he lit the fuse. He encouraged her suspicions, let the hatred build in her until the act seemed inevitable. But he chose his moment. He followed her that night, brought the mirror as insurance. Perhaps she dropped hers. Or perhaps he took it in advance, intending to frame her if need be. Either way, when she fled in horror, he finished the job. Olivia stared into the flames. She'll go to prison, won't she? Most likely, though not for murder. Not now. Olivia closed her eyes. I'm not sure I can forgive her. No, Whimsy said, but you might one day forgive yourself for not stopping it. She turned sharply. I didn't know what they planned. No. But you saw what was happening. The old man, Julian, was not a sympathetic character, but he was not a monster either. You hated him. Eloise hated him more. You left her alone with him that night. I was afraid, she whispered. Quite so, Whimsy said, with a tone that was neither judgmental nor sympathetic, and she used that fear to her purpose. It was very tidy, very Sayersian, all of it. She gave a breathless laugh, a sound almost like disbelief. You use your own name as an adjective. Not mine, no, he said. A friend of mine's. She writes better endings than I do. For a moment they stood in silence again. The snow ticked lightly against the glass. Somewhere down the hall, Fletcher moved with the tact of one who had seen too much and spoken too little. You'll go, she asked, finally. I shall, Whimsy said. Bunter is already packing. He's most efficient when there's scandal in the air. It unsettles his shirts. And what should I do? He looked at her carefully. You'll write letters. You'll send flowers. You'll read the will if there is one, and make decisions about carpets and coal orders. You'll let the lawyers and clergy do their work. And one day, when the house no longer smells like guilt and camphor, you'll open the chapel door and not feel the breath catch in your throat. That sounds like forgetting. It's not. It's merely remembering less precisely. She turned away from the fire then and went to the desk. After a moment, she picked up a small envelope and handed it to him. He wrote this to me, she said. The man who called himself my father. I haven't opened it. I thought, perhaps you should. Whimsy hesitated. Then, with care, he broke the seal. The letter was brief. My dearest child, you must understand that I was never more than a shadow at your hearth. I wore a name not mine and told stories stitched from truth and absence, but I watched you grow with awe. Whatever you believe of me now, I ask only this. Do not let the wrongs done to you become the only thing you inherit. Love, not mine alone, but yours to give, will matter more than vengeance ever did. E.H. Whimsy folded it neatly and returned it. Better you read it yourself, he said. She didn't ask what it said. Later, after a perfunctory farewell to Frimley, who was occupied with paperwork and official calls, Whimsy and Bunter descended the drive in their quiet black car, the house receding behind them like a dream half remembered. The snow had slowed to a drizzle of white mist, and the sun, in defiance of winter's persistence, was attempting a thin, futile gleam over the fenlands. As they turned the corner past the old stone bridge, Bunter said, without looking up from the road, "Shall I file this one under inheritance and impersonation, my lord?" More resentment and reflections, I think, though I suppose it makes no difference to the dead. No, my lord. They drove on in silence. Then, after a while, Whimsy murmured, "The lamp was still burning. I keep thinking about that." "Yes, my lord." "Who lit it? For whom? And why was it not extinguished?" "Symbolic, perhaps." "Everything is symbolic," Whimsy said with a sigh. "The trick is knowing when to stop interpreting before one ends up in poetry." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled faintly. "I think, Bunter," he said, "that it's time for something quite unsymbolic, preferably in a decanter." "Very good, my lord." And they vanished into the mist. The formal inquest was a subdued affair, conducted in a draughty hall behind the vicarage, where the coroner's cough echoed louder than the testimony itself. A handful of villagers came out of duty or mild curiosity, though none seemed especially surprised by the verdict. Death by violence. the result of a blow delivered in circumstances clouded by mental strain and emotional provocation. Eloise Harrow's role, as reconstructed from testimony and forensic facts, was tragic but not damning. There was no doubt she had struck Julian Harrow, nor was there doubt now that the fatal blow had not been hers. What remained, a ghostly thread winding back through mirrors, shadows, and stolen names, was left to Lord Peter Wimsey to explain in his own time and in his own elliptical fashion, which, as it happened, occurred one chilly evening in March, beneath the warm, aging lamps of the Bell and Fiddle, where Inspector Frimley had invited Wimsey to supper by way of gratitude, or perhaps penance, for initially dismissing the irregularities Wimsey had pursued with such idle, infuriating precision. The inspector chewed a thick cut of ham, while Wimsey leaned back with a glass of claret and a faint expression of amusement, as though congratulating the universe for finally catching up with him. "So it wasn't the girl," Frimley said for the fourth time. "Though God knows she nearly killed the old devil. And it wasn't Eloise either, at least not in full. It was him, whoever he really was." "Indeed," said Wimsey, "the man who called himself Edward Harrow. Real name, unknown. Profession, opportunist of the highest class. A real artist in masks." "But how'd you know?" Frimley asked. "Everyone thought he was the grieving son. Widow-maker of some tragedy we'd missed in the registry. I mean, he looked the part." "He did," said Wimsey, "and he played it marvelously well. But no actor can suppress all mannerisms, not if he lives in the part too long. And our Mr. Harrow had two unfortunate habits. He used the wrong preposition with accustomed, always said accustomed with, which no real Harrow ever did, and he quoted Donne as if it were Shakespeare. That was the first crack." Frimley blinked. "You mean the grammar?" "I mean the grammar, yes," said Wimsey patiently. "And the fact that when I asked him about the sea mist rising over the marshes, he said it reminded him of the Bosphorus, when we had no reason to believe he'd ever travelled east of Dover. And then there was the matter of the chapel." "The locked door?" "No," said Wimsey. "The unlocked one. It had been left open deliberately to draw Eloise there. He lit the lamp, left the mirror on the lectern. She followed the trail like a spirit in a half-forgotten legend. And when the blow failed to kill, when she faltered, he finished the act, took the cracked mirror, and placed it on the hearth. Made sure the scene would implicate her. And why?" Frimley scowled. "Because he hated Julian." "Because," said Wimsey softly, "he had spent 10 years building a legend. A son reborn, returning to honor his mother, and Julian threatened that story. Julian, who might have spoken the truth about what really happened that night in Paris. Our friend couldn't afford that." He drained the rest of his glass. "The genius of it was its subtlety," Wimsey went on. "He didn't need to murder Julian Harrow outright. He only needed to nudge another hand to do it. He knew Eloise's instability. He knew Olivia's longing. He crafted roles for them both. Eloise as the instrument, Olivia as the audience. All he had to do was set the stage." Frimley stared down at his untouched pint. "And the body in Paris?" Wimsey tapped his cigarette case against the table. "That was never Julian Harrow. It was an unnamed corpse, cleverly planted. The real Julian vanished in shame, in exile, call it what you like. Our villain took the gap and filled it. Not overnight, of course. He waited years. He researched, played the long game. He built a past and walked into Olivia's life, as if stepping through a veil. It was damned clever." "Too clever," Frimley muttered. "Exactly," said Wimsey. "Too clever for real life. That's what tipped the balance. There's always something too neat, too rehearsed, and I can't abide drama that closes all its curtains without letting in a draft." There was a pause. Then Frimley said, "So you don't think he cared for Olivia?" Wimsey hesitated. "I think he wanted to, or told himself he did. But men like that, they don't love people, they love their own myths. He loved the idea of being a wronged son, a faithful inheritor. He even loved being avenged. Eloise was his fury, Olivia his redemption. Neither of them were allowed to be real. Frimley rubbed his face. God help them both. Yes, said Wimsey quietly. God help them, especially the one still alive. They parted an hour later with a stiff nod and a mutual understanding that neither would likely mention the case again. Wimsey strolled out into the fog-damp evening, the air sharp with the smell of peat and brine, and turned toward the inn where Bunter had already retired to polish shoes and write letters to his cousins in Harrowgate. As he passed the hedge beyond the last lamplight, he paused. The marsh stretched beyond, grey and endless. The moon was rising, a thin silver coin tossed carelessly on a slate sky. He thought of Olivia, of the letter she had finally read. Of Eloise, silent now in a hospital where remorse was examined like a rash, and no one knew what to prescribe. He thought of the false Harrow whose true name no one would ever know, buried under a name he had stolen. He thought, too, of the lamp. It had burned without smoke, without sound, but with a steady, accusing light, until someone, somewhere, had finally extinguished it. He touched the brim of his hat to the mist. "Exit the ghost," he murmured, pursued by consequence. And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey disappeared into the night.